Hi everyone, welcome back to English Introduction to English Literature. Uh, in today's lecture, we will move to a new era, to a new age. Um, we previously discussed the Romantic literature. Before we discussed the neoclassical literature, the Augustan age. And before that, we have the metaphysical poetry. And before the metaphysical poetry, we had the Renaissance era. And before the Renaissance, we had the Middle English literature, and before that, the Old English literature. And I forgot one, the Restoration era, right? Um, we so far we've studied I don't know how many now, 6, 7 literary schools and eras in this course. Today we will study another one, the Victorian novel, the Victorian era novel and poetry, and then we will move to uh, in today's lecture and the next lecture we'll study the Victorian literature again, very briefly, just the few most important points, most important authors, and then we'll move to the last era that we will discuss in this lecture. But just in one lecture, we will just have a general idea about the 20th century. But 20th century is pretty big deal. There's a lot to study about. And this is why we'll talk about this. Then you will have a contemporary literature course just for the 20th century literature, contemporary drama, just the drama in the 20th century, and you will have the criticism to literary theory, another course for the 20th century, and you will study some in the poetry. So you will study more about the 20th century literature in the upcoming courses in the next years. But we don't have much time now to deal with everything. So just we'll have a few just main points here and there. And this also applies to the Victorian era. We'll just have 2 lectures for the Victorian age uh, today and next time, uh, which is not enough. Again, just few very quick ideas about the age, but yeah, you'll be more prepared because in the 3rd year you will have a Victorian literature course, and then you will study more about Victorian poetry in the poetry course. And maybe also here and there you will come across some other Victorian stuff. Uh, okay, so let's get started. First of all, this era is named after, Victoria, from Victoria, after Queen Victoria, Queen of England. So this is the second time we have the whole age called after the Queen of England. The Elizabethan age, and now we have the Victorian age, Victorian era. And again, because Queen Victoria is maybe the the most or the second most important queen in England after Queen Elizabeth, Elizabeth the First, of course, of the 16th century. Okay, so the age lasted from 1832 to 1901. Some people say no, before 1832. Some people would say after, because she became the queen in 1837 or something, and then she died in 1901 in the first year or the second year of the 20th century. And this is why some people stop there. Others stop in 1907, 6 years after her death. It's not just like we sleep and then the next day we just wake up and okay, now we are in the Victorian era, and then we after I don't know how many years we just again wake up in the morning and now it's done, it's a new age. No, it doesn't happen this uh, quickly or this abruptly. It just moves from an age to another age smoothly. Okay, it takes time. So we had the Romantic era, the Romantic literature, and remember who was the first one? Wordsworth, the first Romantic poet in England. And by the way, he was the last Romantic poet in England because he lived the most. Like he started it, and then other people he with Coleridge they started, and so many other poets joined the school, and then all of them died young in a way. And this is why he was the he died um, during the reign of Queen Victoria, 1850 or something. So he was the first and the last Romantic poet. But then, even before he died, and this is why I'm saying it's not just a certain point of time where everything changes, where we have a new era. No, because before he died, we had um, uh, Victorian authors, but still we had at the same time Romantic poets, and that's what we discussed last time. If you remember the two novelists that we discussed last time. Okay, so after the Romantic era, the Romantic poets who talked about nature, about the individual, the person, the solitude, loneliness in a way, and yeah, some of them talked about reform, and this is why they are not the same because the second generation was more revolutionist, but still, they cared more about the individual. And this is why we said that one of the most, maybe the most important feature of the Romantic literature is the individualism, talking about the person, the one. But then we will move in the Victorian novel to talking about or caring about the society as a whole. Okay, before we start, let me ask you again, as always. I want these questions to be in your mind to think about them because we no longer talk about the individual. We're talking about the society now, and the question of the society, the crisis of the society, and the problems of the society were a big deal for the Victorian authors. It's what all the Victorian authors, in a way, discussed the society, the English society. Um, so, how can we consider a society successful? This is a question. How can we say that this society is a good society, is a successful society, and that one is not? Is it when we have rich people and a good economy and strong nation, um, uh, strong army, strong government, strong police, with the safety and everything? Or is it when everyone is safe and everyone is not necessarily rich but not poor? There is no um, uh, uh, all people are in a way equal. All people have equal rights in a way. Is this a successful society, or what? What is a successful society? Because this is a question. So many people, so many schools in economy, in politics, in literature, so many people, so many thinkers uh, discuss this question, and there's a huge debate about this. Is it when everyone has the rights, or is it when the society as a whole is strong and some people are rich enough and good enough, and and especially at that age, the late 19th century, this was a huge question, where capitalism believed in uh, the greater uh, benefit of the greatest number of people, something like this, so that not all people are important, but when a good um, uh, quantity of people uh, are feeling good, are rich, have money, it's enough, you know um, uh, but not necessarily everyone, but the Marx also in that era. By the way, Marx, he's a German thinker, a philosopher, but he lived in England during the era of Queen Victoria. um, and he had other views. And Angels, his friend, he had other views that no, a good society is a society where everyone has equal rights, where nobody is an outsider. Because yes, we're talking about the society as a whole, but also the individual is you know is what makes society a group of individuals. So when can we, or what is an outsider? When can we call someone an outsider in a society? When what's an outsider? Outsider is someone that is kicked out or left behind in the margins. This is an outsider. Just as we said that John Donne was an outsider, right? Afra Ben was an outsider. So what is an outsider? And uh, why do we have outsiders in society? Why society sometimes does not approve someone um, because they fought or they criticize the morals, the values of society? What are the reasons? Okay, this in a way introduction. Today we will talk more about again briefly about the Victorian era, about three of the most important authors of that time: Charles Dickens, George Eliot, and Thomas Hardy. Three very important authors of the Victorian era. Three very important novelists, because in the Romantic era, poetry was the thing, right? Everyone was writing poetry. And this is why we say the Romantic poetry most of the time. Um, uh, Everyone was writing poetry. Poetry was the form of writing. And we said then that prose developed quickly, developed rapidly. And this is why the Victorian era is the age of novel. There is poetry. We'll talk about this next time, inshallah, and you will talk more. You'll learn more about it in the poetry course and in the Victorian course. But the most important form of writing in that era is novels. Why? I said this before. Uh, what form is better for what theme? And most of you said that when you want to talk about society, you write in prose. But when you want to talk about the individual, the person, the individual experience, maybe you will like poetry more, right? Some people believe in this. I personally find it interesting that yes, when you talk about society, most of the time you go to novels, but poetry is like the most important poems, the most famous ones are the ones that talk about the personal experience, either of the poets or just the persona. But this is just what people, but still poetry can be about society, and novels can still be about the individual. So it's not necessarily like this or that. Now, in the Victorian era, the monarchy was not very popular. And this is why Victoria became a symbol of, Queen Victoria became a symbol of the age. Because now Queen Elizabeth was a symbol of her age in the late 16th century. But again, she was the ruler, right? She was the most important person there in England, right? She was the ruler. The king, the queen was important then. But we said that after that, no, we had a parliament and a government, and the prime minister became the most important after the Glorious Revolution, and before after the Commonwealth. Since then, uh, the prime minister is the most important, is the ruler in England until this very day. But why do we call it the Victorian era, even though the queen was not that important? It is because the monarchy became not, some people wanted it to become a republic. England, we had the French Revolution, we have so many revolutions at the time before that, and people just, they were sick. And to this very day, so many English people in Britain, they're sick of the idea of the queen and the king. Like, why do we have to have a monarchy? Like we are a democratic nation, and we don't need a queen or a king. They are no longer important. But again, because the government wanted to keep the monarchy, because they wanted to keep the regime, the political arena as it is in England, they made this image of Queen Victoria as the symbol, as a symbol of the age. They made her more. They called her the Empress of India. Imbratorit India. They gave her more importance. They made her. They gave her this image of the strong queen, even though she was not as important as Queen Elizabeth, for example. The queen was not. She didn't like she didn't decide what to do or what not to do. There was a parliament and a prime minister and a government, and that's it. But they made her important. But still, the age was not England at that age was not very in a way it was restless. There were so many problems at that time, especially in the society. And this is why, as I said before, novels talked about at that age, talked about society, discussed society, because there was poverty and there was richness. And this is why we have double standards at that age. There were even rules just for the rich and other rules just for the poor. And this made the gap between them even greater. Um, and we had unemployment, and this is why people were poor. And unemployment, the unemployment problem, which we, by the way, face here in Gaza, um, was due to the Industrial Revolution, because the machine became more important than the man, right? What the one job that needed 10 men to do before, it needs now one person, one man, and a machine, and that's it. There was a problem with education and the laborers. You know what? The laborers are the workers, from labor. And this is why we have the Labour Party in England, حزب العمل, the Labour Party. So the laborers also had the problems, and this is why, uh, and that's what Marx talked about and his friend, problems of the laborers as a class. Okay, so many problems in the society, and the government was not always successful in dealing with these problems, and the Britain was at that time, at the late 19th century, was the greatest nation on earth. It occupied, colonized half of the earth, half of the land, um, in Europe, in India, in Asia, everywhere. The whole India, you know how big India is, was a colony, a British colony. Uh, but at the last days, at the last years of the Victorian era, so many revolutions started inside England and outside, especially in the colonies, started to, including the Indian mutiny. What is mutiny? Mutiny is like a revolution, especially when the militants join the revolution. This is a mutiny, a siyan, I think in Arabic. The Indian mutiny. The Indian people called it, and this is what the book called it, but the Indian people called it the first war of independence, حرب الاستقلال الأولى. But again, the British would call it a mutiny. Again, this is the Western mentality. You know, it's mutiny. It's people rebelling against the authority, when actually it is a war for freedom, for independence, because you were occupying them, colonizing them. And this is why they would call us, when we fight the occupation, when we resist, they would call us terrorists, or at best they would say that these are acts of violence. The violence that's going on, you know, they would call it violence, they would call it escalation. Israel Hamas war, you know, a war between Hamas and Israel, and there's no mention of the occupation, of the freedom, the people who want freedom and who resist the occupation. And this is again why they call it the Indian mutiny, while the Indian people call it the first war of independence. Yes, it at the end they were defeated and the British controlled again, but it was the first war, and then so many other wars until the Indian people had their freedom from England, from Britain. Okay, but this was the first time that it's not going very well in the colonies, that there are problems here and there at that age. Also, the beliefs of the age were again shocked, questioned by a very important book, a very important idea that started at the age at that time, which is um, the origin, the book by Charles Darwin on the origin of species. This is one of the books that maybe changed the history, changed the world, because it. I don't know if you have an idea about the book and about Charles Darwin and his theory of evolution, um, but it talked about how the species, all the animals, all the plants, every all the creatures, um, how they developed, how they evolved, how they became what they are. He explained it scientifically in a way. He just started with the idea, but then it developed later on. But at the time, it questioned the beliefs of the age, because people believed that it's just as simple as God created everything and that's it. But he said, no, there is a scientific explanation of everything. And people were angry at him. And by the way, to this very day, still there are people who are very angry at Charles Darwin uh, uh, and the theory, because it's just as simple as God created Adam and Eve, and that's it. But he talked about not only the man. By the way, on the origins of species, he didn't talk about men, human beings. In a later book, he talked about men, how man evolved from a species. I'm not really sure because I'm not a biology student, but it's something like not the chimpanzees, the apes, who were the fathers of the chimpanzees and the men, or something like this. But it was very shocking back then in Europe. Um, Again, as the idea that God uh, sends us the clouds with rain, with water, and that's it. But then the science explained it that no, there are electronic, I don't know what, there's a scientific explanation of rain. It's not just, yes, there's God who created everything, but science doesn't talk about religion in any way. But science says that it's not necessarily as easy as this. No, there is an explanation for everything. There's a reason for everything, and there's a reason for this reason, and etc. So anyway, our important point here is that the beliefs of the age were questioned. What people always thought that it is this way turned out to be more complex, more complicated than this. Now, Charles Darwin um, was Charles Darwin and George Eliot and three Bronte sisters, Thomas Hardy. They were the most important novelists of the age. Charles Darwin, George Eliot, Thomas Hardy. We will talk about them today, and next time we will go to the three Bronte sisters and the Victorian poetry. These are the most important Victorian novelists of the age. Okay. So let's start with Charles Darwin, maybe the most important novelist ever, not just in the Victorian age, but maybe ever in the English history or maybe the European history, if we don't consider Dostoevsky and the Russian novelists. Um, so who is Charles Darwin? Charles Darwin is an English novelist, maybe as important as Shakespeare. His name is just like as Shakespeare. Is not just as important, as famous as Shakespeare. His works, his novels, is maybe as famous as Shakespeare's plays. And his main concern in his novels, especially the later ones, is society. the social problems. But he started with some, let's say, journalistic or journalistic novels, history novels. But then his first successful novel was a comedy, a light comedy in a way, a comic book. It's called The Pickwick Papers. This was his first successful novel when he started to become a famous novelist. Um, and then he wrote so many other books. So some of them were comedies, others were really serious, were really, in a way, sad. Some of them discussed the society, others discussed the the history, the historical scene, and as I said, others were journalistic. Um, Now, his most important novel ever, the one that you might study in the Victorian course, Victorian literature course, is Oliver Twist. Oliver Twist is a really big novel. It's really big, like really big, like more than 500 pages. Uh, in some prints, it's like 700. More than 50 chapters. A really big novel, Oliver Twist, but a very interesting one. Like it's really big, but it's still one of the most read novels ever. All people love it. It's very interesting, very exciting, and in a way very deep because it discusses so many important um, issues of the society. This picture, this painting, is from the very important scene at the beginning of the novel. Of this is Oliver Twist. His name, the main character, is a boy, a little boy. This is him, Oliver, um, and he's asking for more food. Please, sir, I want some more. Please, sir, I want some more. This is a very famous line by Oliver Twist. Please, sir, I want some more. Um, Now, who is Oliver Twist? He is um, an orphan. He was born an orphan, okay, and he was mistreated in the orphanage, in the institution for the poor people where he was in. You see, they didn't give him enough food, and this is why he wanted more food. And if you can see from the picture, the rest of the boys, the little boys, were shocked by his courage or maybe his stupidity to ask for more food. He was punished severely after that. I don't want to spoil it for you again. As always, I always tell you that I don't want to spoil it, but then at the end of the day, I spoil it. But maybe you can read the book or at least watch the movie. But the movie is not enough because the movie is like 2 hours, 2 hours and a half. But if you want to talk about all the details, you maybe need 8 hours or 9 hours or 10 hours, maybe. It's a very big book. But the movie gives not all the scenes, not everything, but just a general idea of the novel. Now, because they mistreated him, Oliver runs away to London, to the city, and this is where the rest of the novel happens. He meets or he joins a gang of thieves, people who steal money and napkins from people. But he didn't know that they were thieves at first, but then he knew that, and he still he didn't want to join them, but they forced him. A very big story, a very large story. The gang, the head of the gang, is a Jewish man called Fagin. Fagin, a very important figure in the English literature. Very important, Fagin, which reminds us of Shylock. And this is why so many people consider this novel to be anti-Semitic, because it, so many stereotypes about Fagin. A Jewish man cares about money, not good person, no morals. So many stereotypes. We might discuss this. You might discuss it, and Read more about it when you read the novel in the Victorian literature course. Now, despite the tough circumstances and like the whole novel is heartbreaking, there are some comic scenes here and there, but the general atmosphere is very sad most of the time. So many problems this poor boy faces, but at the end there is a happy ending. He knows his origins, he knows his family. Okay, I spoiled it, right? A very happy ending, and he becomes rich. And this is how most of the Victorian novels, not just Charles Dickens, most of the Victorian novels were like. So many problems, so many difficulties, and then a happy ending. And this is why people hated our friend Hardy. We'll talk more about this when we reach him, because obviously he didn't have happy endings. But for Charles Dickens, for the guys, they were happy endings. Nicholas Nickleby is another novel similar to Oliver Twist. We have Nicholas, who is a boy who suffers at school terribly. And this is how Charles Dickens discussed the problem of education. He talked about education for everyone, for all the children, that education is a right that all children should have. And this is an idea he discussed in his novel, in Nicholas Nickleby. Um, Now, I'm really sorry. Okay, now, um, in Nicholas Nickleby and in Oliver Twist does not set in London, but then he goes to London, he travels to London. And Nicholas Nickleby, it happens in London. And this is how Dickens criticizes the city, because people moved from the country to the city, okay, but the city has so many problems, so many poor people lived in the city, and they lived there and they didn't have a chance to share the success and the wealth of the nation. And this brings us back to the idea of the successful society, because London was the most important city in the universe, in the world, at least, because we don't know much about the universe. Maybe there were other uh, cities somewhere else in the universe. But in the world at that time, London was the most important city. But still, it was not a successful society, at least for Dickens, because so many poor people lived there miserably, and they didn't have equal rights. They were outsiders, kicked in the margins of the society. Um, and they lived a miserable life, just like the lives of Nicholas and Oliver. And generally in his novels, especially the later ones, he um, gives the voice to the poor, to the victims, to the children, especially the children, okay? To give an idea of their lives, of how they lived, of their problems. But who are the audience of Dickens? Are they the poor? Would the poor buy and read his novels, or buy the because again, some of the novels, like not the novels, like Oliver Twist, were published in magazines, in newspapers, chapter by chapter every week in a series, and others later were published in books, 3 volumes or something. So who would buy the novels and read them? Not the poor, usually the middle class, who grew richer and richer. And this is why some of them were angry at Dickens, because they wanted just to read, to have fun, to enjoy, not to feel ashamed or to feel guilty for the other people, because he always makes them feel that they are part of the problems these people suffer. Another novel, which is a slightly different, not slightly, which is really different from the rest of the novels, is David Copperfield. Now, David Copperfield is another story about a kid, about a child, David, who grows up and becomes the kind of of a successful um, uh, person that the Victorian admired. You know, the symbol of the Victorian age. Very successful, very rich. Uh, he gets married. You know, um, very happy story. Completely happy. And by the way, it's semi-biographical in a way. It's just like an autobiography because some of the events are actually the events of his life, of Dickens' childhood, and how he became successful. This is David Copperfield. But then we had another novel, Great Expectations. You know, Great Expectations, which was to be happy or something, but at the end it's not really happy. It's disappointing. You know, there's this sense of frustration, anger at the end, um, because it talks about the title is Great Expectations, but what actually uh, happens in the novel is not that great. Nothing is great in this novel. So it gives this sense of disappointment, not as happy and cheerful as David Copperfield. This is for Great Expectations, which is ironic from its title. Now, if we talk about Charles Dickens, we most of the time talk about three more very important, very famous novels: Oliver Twist, The Tale of Two Cities, and Hard Times. Now, we talked about Oliver Twist. Hard Times is the saddest novel, the most tragic novel of them, from its name, Hard Times. It's the novel of the age for him. It talks about society as it is, the worst sides of the industrial society, and especially it exposes the education system, how Mr. Grand wanted the teachers to teach kids just facts. Facts, teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. You can read more about this quote, and you maybe want to read Hard Times, the novel. But it criticizes the education system, um, uh, and this is kind of symbolizes the whole idea of the system. Facts, teach these boys and girls nothing but facts. Very important and famous quote. Okay. Briefly, you don't want to talk more about this, but the novel gives a very pessimistic picture of England. Um, uh, Maybe realistic, but very sad, very pessimistic. It doesn't give you any hope. Not like Copperfield, not like even Oliver Twist that ends at the end happily. At least for Oliver, it ends happily uh, at the end, which gives you some hope. Now, uh, A Tale of Two Cities again is one of the most famous novels of all time, not just in the Victorian era, but of all time. And it starts with with a very famous line: "It was the best of times. It was the worst of times." A very successful line by Charles Dickens. Now, it's a historical novel in a way because it talks about the French Revolution, and the two cities are London and Paris. Okay, um, and then we have the last novel that you talk about is A Christmas Carol. A Christmas Carol is uh, a novel that talks about Christmas. You know, as a family celebration, an event where family celebrates at the end of the year, Christmas. Um, And some people consider this novel to be one of the reasons that Christmas have this importance now. It was always important, but at first for religious reasons, but now it's more of a national thing in Europe and in England. Moving to George Eliot. Now, George Eliot is not a man. George is a man's name, but George Eliot is a woman. Her actual name was Mary Ann Evans. She was born like this, and she was all the time Mary Ann Evans. This was her name. She was a translator. But then she became a novelist. Uh, First short writer, short story writer, and then a novelist. And Mary Ann Evans, in her pen name, you know what's a pen name? A pen name is, like the name you use in your books uh, um, as an author, by George Eliot instead of by Mary Ann Evans. This also happened with George Eliot, whose name was not George Eliot, but he was a man at the end of the day. Now, she is considered maybe the greatest woman novelist since Afra Ben. Um, she she started with a collection of short stories. I forgot the name. It happened in a church, something. It's related to church, religion, or something. But her first novel was Adam Bed in 1859. And she discussed controversial themes, especially related to women. A woman having a drunk husband. This was a problem at that society, and is still a problem in these days. In the Western world, we have this phenomena. Uh, Women who have their drunk husbands, who are not responsible, who always mess it up, and we have it in a way in our societies in the Arab world. Not necessarily drunk, some are, but people who have drugs, take drugs, something. Uh, so she discussed this. She discussed the issue of single mothers. What's a single mother? A single mother is a mother who is not married, who is unmarried, single, but still mother. She has children. Maybe because she was divorced, maybe because her husband died, or she had a kid outside the framework of marriage, and the father did not claim responsibility. So many reasons, and we have this phenomenon, single mothers. And to this very day, so many people talk about um, this problem or this issue, single mothers. She talked about it back in the 1860s. In her later novels, she writes about the whole society, not just women, the whole society. Now, Middlemarch is considered by many people to be the greatest novel in the English language, but at least one of the most important, most famous novels in the English history. Middlemarch by George Eliot. Now, what is Middlemarch? Middlemarch is a fictional is a novel that is set in a fictional town in England. Okay, um, now it discusses so many changes that happened at the time. Now it is set in 1832, and so many things happened back then. We had the rail transport, for the trains. This changed. This transformed everything back then because moving became easier. And when moving becomes easier, everything becomes different. Trade, education, politics. So many things changed. And back then also the voting system changed because every man, not woman, but every man became uh, had the right to vote. That was not available for every man, for all the people from everywhere, from all the classes, from all the origins before that. But then the voting system changed because so many people pushed for this change, and they kept pushing until, by the way, 1917. I'm not really sure, but the first half of the 20th century, when women had the right to vote. In England, women did not have the right to vote before the 20th century, the first half of the 20th century. She talked about medicine. She talked about the roles of women. So discussing so many things. And there's one idea that's very important also in this novel to end with is the dead hand of the past. What's the dead hand of the past? This is a metaphor that refers to things that happen in the past and end, but still their effects um, still influence the present, and this is why it's a dead hand. Hand because it manipulates, it changes, it affects, but it's dead because it ended, but its effects did not. For example, you can say that the British occupation of Palestine in 1920 is after the World War, the First World War, is is a dead hand of the past. Why? Because yes, it ended, but its effects are still influencing our present, which is the Zionist movement and the occupation state. Uh, Now, there is the heroine in this novel, Middlemarch. Dorothea is a strong woman who finds her own independence and happiness. And generally, not just in this novel, but the philosophy of Eliot in general is called positivism. What's positivism? From positive, being positive, optimistic. Believing that things becomes better, that society changes to the better. Yes, slowly sometimes, but still always progress. Uh, Progress means moves to the better. Okay. So this is George Eliot. Now let's finish with Thomas Hardy. I don't know uh, how much time do we still have. Okay, let's try to finish Thomas Hardy quickly. Now Thomas Hardy is um, 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 is the face of the late years of the Victorian era, or the late years of the 19th century, because he talked about that era, which had more problems than the first years of the era. And this is why his novels were hated. So many people hated them because they were very sad, very tragic, to the extent that people burned his books, his novels in public. And private libraries did not want to buy his books. Um, but what actually Hardy did is showing the truth as it is, the conflict between the traditional and the modern, how the society now is actually going like. Um, his characters are often victims to destiny, you know, just like this. We'll see this in a bit. This is how the world goes. Uh, and also victims of double standards. And this again moves us to the question of the good and the successful society. And we will also discuss this in a bit. Um, Now, uh, test of the Der Privilege of 1891 is one of his most important novels. It talks about a young girl. Her name is Tess, and she's described in the cover of the novel, in the subtitle, as a pure woman. A pure woman, innocent, innocent, very pure. She was sent by her parents to work for a rich family, but there she was raped by Alec, a rich man. So discussing this problem, rape, it was discussed before, remember, with Afra Ben and uh, with with Mary Evans. So this is an actual problem in the society back then, and is still an actual problem in this world to this very day, sadly, of course. So he discussed this, how this was raped by Alec, and then she gets pregnant, gives birth to a boy she calls Sorrow. The boy, Sorrow means sadness. She calls the baby Sorrow, but then the baby soon passes away. dies. But then she falls in love with another man whose name is Angel. You know, he's Angel. But then Angel leaves her because he learns about her past, that she was raped and she got pregnant and she had a baby and the baby died. And she becomes sad. And what does she do? She goes to Alec and kills him, the rapist. Um, and he gets what he deserves, you know, he gets killed. But then because she kills a man, she is sentenced to death. You know, sentenced, حكمت in quote to death. They kill her. And then the novel ends with this quote starting with justice, between two brackets, justice was done, which is ironic. Because what's justice? She was raped, but they did not do anything to him because he's rich and she's poor. And this is double standards. The law also goes only goes to the poor, but then the rich, no. But when she kills him, now the law works. They kill her. They sentence her to death. What justice is this? This is not justice, right? This is corruption, and this is part of the problem. Because if they imprisoned him, if they sentenced him to death because of his victim rape, this is one of the I said this before. One of the worst crimes ever, rape. Even in prison, you know, when you go to the criminals in prison, when they prison a rapist now, and he goes to the prison for rape, and the prisoners, the criminals in the prison, the thieves and the killers, and they know that he's a rapist, they hate him. Sometimes they kill him inside the prison because he's a rapist. Like, you can steal, you can kill, you can be a horrible human being, but you cannot be a rapist. This is the worst thing ever, rape. And this novel discusses this idea by Thomas Hardy. A very tragic ending. Even the ending is very tragic. You know, she kills him and then they kill her. Another tragic novel is The Mayor of Casterbridge. Now, this guy, Henchard, is very ambitious, reminds us of Dr. Faustus. He wants to become the mayor of Casterbridge. He wants to become rich. So how does he start? He sells his wife and his daughter. Very horrible. And then he actually manages to become rich and eventually becomes the mayor of Casterbridge. And then he wants to look for his wife and daughter, but he cannot have them back. Once he sells them, he cannot have them back. And then his wife and his daughter die at the end. And he's considered a tragic hero in a way. And this is his flaw, that he sold his wife and his daughter, and he at the end dies. So this is a very black, very dark, very tragic, you know, starting with selling his wife and his daughter and ends with their death. Very dark novel. Another one is Jude or Judy the Obscure. Judy the Obscure. Now, Judy the Obscure is a novel about Judy. Judy is the name of a man, Judy, who's ambitious, but he is a laborer. He's from the working class, a laborer, you know, a laborer from the working class, but he's ambitious. He wants to study at Oxford, not Oxford. In the novel, it's called Christminster University, but it's actually Hardy's name for Oxford. He's criticizing the academia because it was also a classist institution, you know, just for some people, not for everyone. He wanted to study there, but he belonged to the working class. He was not from that class. And this is the society where we have a working class, very poor, and they don't have equal rights and equal opportunities, because it's not about rights, because sometimes the law, especially now, says that everyone is equal. But actually, not everyone has the same opportunity. Some people have more opportunities than others. Now, he's married to someone to another woman, to a woman, but he's in love with another one, Sue, and he has a complex relation with her, and they have children, but they cannot get married. But at the end, their children commit suicide. Very sad, very tragic, and this is why people hated him, hated his, not hated him. He's brilliant, but some people even banned his books because he was. They were very devastating, very tragic, very sad, and they discussed very sensitive issues, and this is why, especially the people who are criticized here, the rich people, they were very angry at him. Now, generally, the struggle between ambition and the human weakness and the problems of the society makes this problem. Sorry, this novel, Judy the Obscure, Hardy's most um, tragical, most tragic novel. Very disturbing, very sad. And this brings us again to the question I started with. What's an outsider and what's a successful society? Because Hardy lived in the strong England, the the empire that controlled half of Earth, right? But he exposes this successful society, this strong nation that leaves most of its people in the margins, where uh, the outsider, who are the outsiders here? The women, like Tess, are kicked out. Nobody, they don't have equal rights, and the the working class men. So how about the working class women like Tess? Um, so he exposes this society very strong, very successful, but still most of the people are poor and don't have equal rights, and most importantly don't have equal opportunities. And this is why Judy, he wanted to study at Oxford, but he couldn't. He wanted to marry Sue, but he couldn't. So many problems because they don't have equal rights and equal opportunities, to the extent that the children commit suicide. Very sad, but makes people really think about their society, about the problems they face in their society. Now, this is the end of today's lecture. I want to recommend this movie, Victoria and Abdul. It's not literary, but it gives you an idea of the society. It talks about Victoria, Queen Victoria, who was a widow for the last 30 years of her life because her husband, Prince, I forgot his name, he died early, and then she lived her last 30 or 40 years um, a widow. And this is her relationship with Abdul, a Muslim character. Um, so a very interesting film, gives you just the atmosphere of the age, the Victorian age, Queen Victoria as the symbol of of England, but still how her actual life was like. Uh, and the subtitle here is History's Most Unlikely Friendship, the friendship between Victoria and Abdul. You can watch this movie and then join me in the discussion, the Facebook group, uh, about this question between today's three authors, Dickens, Hardy, and George Eliot. Who's your favorite? Whom did you like the most? I know you didn't read their works, but from their styles and the themes they discussed, and why. Who's your favorite and why? Thank you very much, everyone, for watching. I know it's a long lecture, but I hope very informative and very engaging. Thank you and goodbye. See you, inshallah, next weekend with the second lecture of Victorian literature on the last one, and then we'll have a last lecture, a finale for the 20th century. مع السلامة.